It's Wednesday, August 9th, 2023. I'm James Brierton. An all new edition of the Carolina Weather Group is coming your way next. Our guest this week, WCNC Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. It is Wednesday, August 9th, 2023. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group, a weekly show about weather, science, technology, and more, coming to you this week across the platforms of the Carolina Weather Group and streaming on WCNC+. This week, we're going to be looking back at that astonishing severe weather event that rolled through the Carolinas, both north and south on Monday, with over 300 damage reports, ranking in one of the most damaging days in the Carolinas in the past 20 years. You're taking a look right now at a tweet from Corey Smith, a meteorologist at WLTX, the CBS affiliate in Columbia, South Carolina, that matches up that radar and that severe line of storms with all of the damage reports that came littering in behind it. The National Weather Service offices across the Carolinas have been out doing storm surveys with the meteorologists who were keeping you safe on day one with those real-time warnings are now out in the field on day 2 and day 3 after the event, observing storm damage, looking at the storm damage, trying to find out what the exact strength of that storm was and whether or not it was caused by a tornado or straight line winds. Here in the greater Charlotte area, the National Weather Service has confirmed at least 2 tornadoes, one of them in northern Mecklenburg County in the Huntersville area, an EF0 with 85-mile-per-hour winds, and another astonishing tornado that was on the ground for some 37 miles, an EF1 with max peak winds of 110 miles an hour going across 3 counties and stretching from the city of Conover through Mooresville and into China Grove. It is some crazy storms, but when you look at what the Weather Service has found so far, lo and behold, it's been about just 2 tornadoes. And what is the difference between a tornado and thunderstorm wind, and why are they treated differently? Well, WCNC Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich posted this today on the platform that I'm still going to lovingly call Twitter, and let me read it to you now. He wrote, Monday, we saw over 200 reports of wind damage in our area. 11 of those reports were directly tied to the 2 tornadoes confirmed, meaning that 95% of all of the damage reports came from straight line winds. The damage from straight line winds is often more widespread as severe as tornadoes. Your damage is not diminished by what caused it. Remember, all high winds can cause damage. Please take all warnings seriously, especially when we know winds are considerable or destructive like the storms on Monday. It's worth noting, Brad writes, that Hurricane Hugo was a straight line wind event and is the worst damaging wind event in our area that we have ever seen. Joining us this week on the Carolina Weather Group, we have WCNC Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich to ask him more about his post from today. And from our Carolina Weather Group panel, we have Frank Strait in Columbia and Jared Smith in Charleston. So, Brad, let me start with you. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you meant and what drove you to make that post today?
Well, it was such an interesting event with the straight line winds that I felt it was important because everybody would see those 2 tornado tracks and immediately people started questioning like, oh, I think that track should be further south. I had damage here. Or oh, was there a tornado here or there because there was trees down? And I was kind of to answer the question like, no, it doesn't necessarily mean the tornado was there because this was all embedded in a huge squall line that had, 60 to 85 mile an hour winds. And the thing I always want people to understand is that these severe thunderstorm warnings, we don't take them seriously enough often. And Monday was one of those days where we were actually on the air, staying on for severe thunderstorm warnings and treating them like tornado warnings because of how severe these systems were. In fact, there was a couple destructive tags on these warnings, which meant the wireless emergency alerts on your phone were being set off automatically for severe thunderstorm warnings. And so the reason for that tweet was just so people know that, hey, I understand you had widespread damage. Some people think that you need to have a tornado to have widespread damage. And they think if you call it straight line damage that you're diminishing what happened to them. I'm not at all. I'm trying to tell you that straight line winds are just as bad as tornadoes. In fact, you mentioned that northern Mecklenburg tornado. That was an EF0. Most of that track was only 70-mile-per-hour winds, but there was straight line wind damage in Catawba County to the north that was actually stronger at 80 to 85 mile per hour winds than the actual tornado. So believe it or not, some of the strongest winds weren't even in the tornado that was in northern Mecklenburg County.
And I think it's always so interesting, Brad, is that when people see damage, and this is a little bit
Yeah.
what the Weather Service goes out to look at when they do their storm surveys, people see snapped trees, they see damage to
Yeah.
cars and to roofs, and they just immediately assume it's a tornado. And I
Yeah.
suppose we're not here to say you're wrong, but we're here to educate on saying wind is wind, as I think as you famously say.
Yeah, I like saying that often. Wind is wind. All wind damage looks the same. The only difference is which way the trees bend and break. And my example of Hugo was a great example. I think I looked back and Frank probably knows a little bit more. I think the number of trees was estimated was like some ridiculous, like 150,000 trees were destroyed in North and South Carolina, some ridiculous number. Okay.
So is
And
that
we
all?
lost power. Yeah, I think it might have been more, but it's hard. That's a number it's hard to estimate. But you see some of these crazy numbers, and everyone knows. I mean, it was like 3.5 million people lost power for like 2 weeks. All of that was technically from straight line winds in a hurricane. So it just goes to show you that straight line winds are very powerful. And I think a tropical system is a good example because the Weather Service has a tough job. Sometimes there's embedded tornadoes in the bands around hurricanes. And to try to decipher what was the hurricane wind versus the tornado damage is really difficult. And that's kind of the same problems they ran into this week because you had all this widespread straight line wind damage. And then embedded in there, you had two tornadoes. And I should also mention the one tornado was only 50 yards wide, the other one was 550 yards wide. Those are tiny in comparison to the swath of damaging winds, which in some cases, the one in Catawba County was 14 miles wide of 80-mile-per-hour winds. So oftentimes, the more widespread the damage, I know this seems counterintuitive, the more likely it's not a tornado. It's straight line winds because straight line winds are just bigger. They take up more. That's that graphic I showed because that was when I first started getting really worried about widespread damage. When I saw that, 65 to 85-mile wind south of Interstate 40, I was giving people a heads up. I'm like, Lake Norman, Mooresville, you need to treat this like a tornado because this is going to cause widespread tree damage. And we saw that.
And I can attest to what you said was that at WCNC, we stayed on the air, and loyal listeners of the show know that I work behind the scenes with you. And we stayed on until 7 o'clock, which was beyond our normal news time frame, because although there were no tornado warnings at that time, we had thousands of people without outages, without power, because of the impacts of these 85 mile per hour, almost hurricane like wind gusts, if you will, in terms of just equating in your mind to dig down on your tropical analogy, how strong these things are. And I know the next day, KJ Jacobs, a meteorologist with us at WCNC Charlotte, did a story explaining the difference between straight line and tornado. And we have this graphic, Brad. I'll let you explain to folks what maybe the Weather Service and what you and other meteorologists are looking at to determine what exactly caused that damage.
So the best way to find tornado damage is one, you're going to use radar data first to kind of look in the areas you want to investigate. So you're going to look back at the data and go, okay, we had a couplet or we had rotation here. So now let's go find damage that matches up with the radar. And so obviously the whole area, there were trees everywhere. They're all blown down, some in different directions. But the way that the trees lay is important. In a tornado, they're often going to lay in different directions, but there's a key difference here. Sometimes they lay towards a convergent line. Tornadoes tend to pull air into them. They suck air towards the tornado. So the trees to the north of the track would be laying to the south, and the trees to the south of the track would be laying to the north. They'd all point kind of towards the tornado track. Or they'll be crisscrossed where one tree will be laying over another at a 90-degree angle. That's typically the kind of damage you're looking at for tornadoes. One of the things they're not looking for, which is a big myth, is twisted trees. You get people that say, my tree was twisted. Everything that's vertical twists in the wind. If you've ever been on a windy day, seen a sign just going like this, when you have a vertical structure and the wind hits it, its tendency is to twist. So the twisting motion of a tree is not a sign of a tornado at all. It's just a sign of straight line winds because all trees are going to twist, and even in a straight line wind, for a tree to twist because of a tornado, the tornado width would have to be the width of the trunk of the tree. Because that's what it would take to twist the tree like that from a tornado. In fact, the width is usually 50 yards or higher. And so what happens is a bunch of trees are being pulled towards. They're not being twisted. They're being pushed over just in different directions.
Brad, my next question to you is a little twofold. So, when we think about tornadoes, we think about the EF scale, and people know that comes
Yeah,
in a tier of 0 through 5. When we think about hurricanes, that comes on a scale. And then when a hurricane gets named, certain things get activated in terms of insurance policy things
yeah.
and so on and so forth. Is there a struggle with trying to communicate the impact of winds because we don't have a jazzy scale for it, if you will, in terms of classifying them on tiers of 0 through 5?
Yeah, that's true, but I think the Weather Service has made some pretty good adjustments over the year, and we actually talked a lot about this on Monday. Severe thunderstorm warnings are actually broken up into three tiers now. There's the base warning, which is 58-mile-per-hour winds or 1-inch diameter hail. Then there's something called considerable, which means you have 70-mile-an-hour winds or higher, and you have golf ball size hail or bigger. And then we have what's called destructive. That's a severe thunderstorm warning with 80-mile-per-hour winds and baseball size hail. Either or. It doesn't have to be both. It's one or the other. And that actually activates the WIA, which is the wireless emergency alert on your phone, and it goes off just like it would for a tornado warning. The reason this is important because sometimes we get derechos or we get very violent storms like on Monday, where the damage raises to the level where people need to seek shelter, not only inside their house, but probably in an interior room because you're going to see widespread damage. So I think that tiered system for the thunderstorm warnings is something we probably should hit more often with the public. And I tried to do that a lot on Monday. Like, hey, these aren't normal severe thunderstorm warnings. Every single one was either considerable or destructive, which is pretty rare for our part. So there you go. There's the criteria. The destructive one would actually trigger a WIA, which is important because for people that don't pay attention to weather, if you're like us, we're all weather weenies and geeks, right? We've got probably 50,000 apps on our phone. We're watching all the time. If you have no weather apps on your phone at all, your phone would go off for a destructive because the wireless emergency alert, which is powered by the cell phone carriers and your cell phone, would operate automatically as long as you have it not turned off. And that's in your settings. If you have an Android or a iPhone, you go into your settings and turn on those emergency alerts and make sure they're on. And one of the cool things is you can have the sound always on, even if you're muted or you're silent, it'll still go off. It's a really loud and annoying sound. I'm not going to lie, but when it goes off, you know something bad's happening.
Yeah, and I want to bring in some of the rest of my Carolina Weather Group panel now because Brad and I are both here in Charlotte, and we have an idea of kind of what happened in this region of the Western North Carolina and even upstate South Carolina. But Frank, you're in Columbia, and Jared, you're in Charleston. This line marched all the way through your areas as well too. It was a equal opportunity event for so much of the Carolinas. What was it like in Columbia there, Frank?
Well, there were some areas around the Midlands that had some damage, but it wasn't a whole lot. Unfortunately, this has been the summer of the meteorologist having the glass dome over his home where nothing happens, and it's been a struggle for me to even get a downpour, much less any kind of severe weather. So it was a little breezy for a while, and it rained for about 10 minutes, and that's about all I saw. And I was at home at the time, but there were a number of reports of damage, and there were also some pretty impressive shelf cloud pictures, but
Oh yeah, lots of shelfies.
really, yeah, a lot of shelfies out there, but not a whole lot of damage and nothing at all where I live.
Jared, you were nearest one of the other tornado warnings we got in the Carolinas, but lo and behold, we didn't get too many tornado warnings.
No, not in the Carolinas. I mean, not in our part of the Carolinas, and certainly not in the Charleston area. I mean, it was actually pretty tame. It wasn't too bad. We were put under a watch for what felt like the first time in forever, but it really wasn't that bad here. We had some spots that that certainly took some that got some strong winds, and there were some trees knocked down, but really nothing too much to write home about. We were kind of on the southern flank of that large swath of wind there, and they were losing their punch by the time they got here. And again, owe it to losing daytime heating a little bit. It was still quite unstable, and honestly, I remember marking to a couple of folks, is like, man, we're kind of getting lucky with this because we still had plenty of instability available. They took a special 18Z sounding, and it was it was pretty juicy. It was ready. I mean, it was the watch type was severe, and it's like, okay, this is a pretty solid setup. But we just, the Charleston bubble. I mean, much as Frank has the glass dome, the Charleston bubble, the Charleston split, right? You know, you get it to the south, you get it to the north. Charleston is like, well, what was that? And like, come on, man. Like, I want some action. And it's like, actually,
Yeah.
no, not with this.
I mean, I was impressed how long that line did hold together, despite the fact that we were getting later on into the evening. We had lost the sun and the heat that came with it. We had all those heat advisories across the Carolinas earlier on Monday, so we had plenty of heat to go around. And I'm going to use this, guys, as a segue into tomorrow's event with another line of thunderstorms coming through at a not impossible, but less frequent time. Brad, let me start with you because I know we have a slight risk across much of the Carolinas tomorrow, as we can see in the SPC outlook here. It's a tier 2 out of 5, which really just equates to a 2% chance of a tornado across a lot of North Carolina and the upper half of South Carolina. But lo and behold, it's that wind threat again at about 15%. That'll probably be where this really comes together. So walk us through the timing and why something can happen so early in the day, if you will.
Yeah, this is a really interesting pattern. Really, this week has been kind of a weird setup. The jet stream's been pretty active over us. We've had some mid-level jet energy that we don't normally see in the summertime. I always tell people, if you want really bad severe weather, you need to have the wintertime jet stream overlapping summertime heat and humidity. Well, that doesn't often happen. It does cross over a little bit in the spring, but let's face it, you don't get August heat and humidity in April or May or March. But in the wintertime, sometimes we have big outbreaks because the jet stream's so powerful and we just get some hot, humid air. What's interesting about this week has been 2 events where we've got pretty strong jet stream energy overlapping pretty hot, humid air mass. So it feels almost like spring setups,
Right.
It was a slight or a low risk for us in the summer is like pretty normal, but to see enhanced and moderates, that aren't related to a derecho is kind of weird. And so tomorrow is an interesting setup in and of itself. And I will first say this as a huge disclaimer, nothing like Monday. Just to put in perspective, you showed that 15% wind prop. It was 45% on Monday. So this is nowhere near the Monday setup. And the time of day is actually, while it's not great, it's probably better than happening in 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We have an MCS, which is a acronym we use for a thunderstorm complex that is likely going to be rolling out of Tennessee, maybe 2 of them. And that should be arriving during the overnight hours or early in the morning. And there probably is going to be a cold pool that will make some gusty winds. I'm not going to be shocked if we have some severe thunderstorm warnings for damaging winds in the morning. But what that is probably going to do and help us out, it's going to work over the atmosphere and it's going to use up all the fuel. And by the time the atmosphere recovers late in the day, the upper energy in the front is going to move through. So the winds will have shifted to the west or northwest and we'll have downsloping coming out of the mountains. And so basically all the ingredients to put together for severe weather is going to be gone by the time the heating of the day gets going. But, let's say these first batches of storms move through quicker and things clear out by late morning and the sun comes out, then there's a chance there could be some little renegade rogue storms that form along the front. And I really think in the Eastern Carolinas, that would be more of my concern, that we might see the I-95 corridor might get some pretty nasty little storms that develop in the afternoon. But for most of the Western Carolinas, I think it's going to be a morning event and then done by lunchtime and things improve. So the one thing I will worry about a little bit, James, though, is because of the damage on Monday, there's probably a lot of hanging branches and loose limbs and trees up here from all the wind damage that haven't been cleaned up yet that could come down in 50, 60 mile an hour winds that would have normally taken the 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds. So you have a lot of exposed structures and trees right now and power lines that were damaged on Monday that could suffer some damage that they normally wouldn't have suffered if it wasn't for what happened on Monday.
Yeah, we had some areas that took 24 hours to get the power back because some very large trees fell on some very sophisticated power lines on this Wednesday night. I feel a sigh of relief looking at the Duke Energy power map right now to see that the number of outages across the Duke Energy service area is below 100. This obviously doesn't represent every power provider, but Duke being, of course, one of the largest, just using that as a sample size. As Brad mentioned, that was in the thousands on Monday, and people
Yeah.
were operating for a long time without power. Frank, I know before our show tonight, you flagged in our internal chat you wanted to make sure we talked about the severe weather event. So I'm sure you've got a couple things on your mind tomorrow that you're looking for from a South Carolina perspective.
Yeah, well, Brad covered most of what I was thinking. The one concern that I have for Western North Carolina and upstate South Carolina is, especially if this ends up coming in a little hotter and faster than the computer models are showing, and that has a tendency to happen, that we could end up having these storms come through at like 3, 4, 5 in the morning, where those people live, and of course any severe weather, especially if there's even an isolated tornado risk happening at night. That's always a hassle. And an extra danger that we have to deal with, that people trying to sleep when severe weather's coming through. So just want to encourage folks to have your weather radio set to wake you up with the piercing loud noise that they make when a warning's issued for your area, or your phone app, whatever. Just make sure you have that set to wake you up, especially if you're in those areas, in case a storm comes along at 4:30 in the morning while you're sleeping.
Yeah, I'm sure my wife was having a blast while we were at work on Monday, because I've got a weather radio upstairs, one downstairs. That was probably the whole house was echoing. But it's for events just like that, right? I want to know if there's a tornado warning or severe thunderstorm warning or flash flood warning, kind of those top three, if you will, for me. And I also kind of just want to mention, as we're talking about multiple ways to get warnings, Twitter is not one of those ways right now. With a platform formerly known as Twitter here at the Carolina Weather Group, WX Brad, WCNC Charlotte, we all were relying on several forms of automation that would allow us to post the warnings that come in from the Weather Service and back out to you in real time, because I know this is hard to fathom, but Brad does eventually go to sleep.
Yeah.
So having
those were lifesavers, because that was a nice thing. I could count on it sending out that warning no matter what was going on. And sometimes it's just because I'm busy on air doing other things. It's nice to have that auto populate, but and the thing about Twitter or X, I'm going to go with Twitter too, James. I'm not doing X.
I just can't do it yet.
You see this argument a lot from people like, I'm not on Twitter, or there's only 22% of the country's on Twitter. The thing about Twitter is it fed so many other services. Like, on our website and our app, my Twitter feed is on our weather page. So even if you're not on Twitter, my warnings would show up in my Twitter feed that was embedded into our website, which is actually got probably a lot of eyeballs on it. So that was the beauty of those tweets, was that it fed a lot of other resources and other platforms where people would see it, even if they weren't on Twitter. And I know a lot of people who aren't active on Twitter who just used it for alerts, because it was a great way to monitor things. So I'm hoping that comes back. Basically, we're back to old school with doing it manually, and I will do it manually when I can. But I think you make a good point. It's one of those things. It's probably not as reliable as it should have been, or it's ever going to be. But that just goes without saying that you need multiple ways. I'm always a 3 minimum way person, but there's probably about 10 or 15 other methods out there you could use. Just at least have 3 of them, so you have some redundancy.
I've woken people up in the middle of the night. I've called my grandma in the middle of the night. She was under a tornado warning. Hey, Grandma, sorry to call you, but I need you to go to your basement. And that's one of the ways. That's one of the ways for sure.
Phone calls and texts are very effective.
They are. Yep. Word of mouth at the end of the day works. Frank, you've got the tropics up behind you on no particular day. No, that's current.
No, that's current.
At the time. Okay. So we're coming into August, which means we're almost coming into September, which means we're almost coming to the peak of hurricane season. Things are, I'm not going to use the Q word right now, but they're stable, but it's very hot out there, Frank, especially in those ocean temperatures. Would you like to take it from here, as I'm trying not to jinx us?
Yeah, do your best. But we're getting, it's the 9th of August. We're getting toward mid-August, and we're heading into the most active part of the hurricane season. So we must accept the fact that even despite being an El Nino year, when you tend to see fewer storms happen, when you get to the peak of the season, there are going to be hurricanes to put up with in the Atlantic. It's just the climatology, just for a while, it's going to overwhelm everything, and we're heading to that time of year. Now, looking behind me there, oh, hey, you got the climatology map there. So you are right at the beginning of that steep climb upward as we head toward the middle of September, when we reach the peak of the season. So that is the time of year that we're in the time of year we have to start watching the tropics very closely. Now, right now, there's not anything going on. The National Hurricane Center doesn't have any areas outlined, even out to 7 days for possible development. So things are okay right now. There are tropical waves out there we're watching. There's one over the Lesser Antilles right now with some showers and thunderstorms, but it's not organized. A few others that aren't really doing anything. One over the Eastern Atlantic right now that you can see over my shoulder there is just now coming off of Africa. That has a broad scale turning with it, but it's not an imminent risk for development. One thing, the little blob of thunderstorms that's east of the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos right now, north of Hispaniola, that one probably nothing comes out of it. But this is the time of year we have to kind of keep an eye on stuff that's close to home, because that's how stuff likes to sneak up on us, and we get an in close development like that. So we'll keep an eye on it, but probably nothing comes out of it. Now, as we go on in time, I've noticed that the computer models are showing conditions gradually becoming less unfavorable over the next 5 to 7 days, and maybe 10 days from now, we might actually have to deal with a storm developing out there. So while we don't have anything going on, some of the models are showing things getting more active as we head toward the end of August. So now is the right time to start gathering your supplies and having your hurricane kit all stocked up and ready to go, or our disaster kit, because it's useful for things other than hurricanes, severe weather outbreaks, earthquakes. We have a chance of seeing all of those here in the Carolinas. So have that stocked up, and now's the time to do it when it's not an urgent matter, because we don't have a hurricane coming right now. Now's the time to get ready. And then you don't have to put up with the rush of people going to the grocery store to buy supplies when a hurricane's maybe 4 or 5 days out.
That never happens, Frank. What are you talking about?
I am sometimes that person. I told people to prepare and I didn't.
Yeah,
here I
you
am.
could be like all the inland people buying all the water for no reason whatsoever.
Milk and bread.
Just,
Just
you can fill up your water before the storm hits, right?
That's
right. Free comes out, or cheaper. Brad, what is the one thing as we head towards this peak of hurricane season that typically lies before us? What's the one thing you're most worried about?
I think what Frank said is kind of getting lulled into this false sense of security, because we've all seen it. The thing about hurricane season, first of all, people will say, "Oh, it's been quiet." Well, we've had 5 named storms. It's actually been a little bit more active than people think, but it always tends to go from 0 to 60 really quickly. Like, we go from nothing happening to literally every wave coming off the coast having some development chance. And the thing that worries me is the water is so warm. Now, warm water is only one ingredient. It's the fuel. You need low shear and moist air and all that. But the thing is, the warm water is banked up against the coastline. So my concern is we've seen a lot of these in the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years of these rapidly intensifying storms. And my concern is that happening close to the coast, because the water is so warm close to the coast, is that you might see that eye wall replacement cycle kind of set up, and something goes, from a Cat 1 to a Cat 3 or 4 overnight. That's what worries me. And as always, it only takes one storm to make for a horrible season. So we could sit here and go, nothing's happening. And then boom, a Cat 3, 4 pumps up and hits us late August, early September. And that might be the only one, but that's going to make the season a horrible season because it hit us. So don't let your guard down. Frank's right. The time to prepare is before the storm happens. Don't wait. The time to put the kit together is now, because you don't want to be waiting. And as Frank mentioned, I think it's great. Like, putting these kits together are great because you can have them sitting there in case something else happens. Power outage. Heck, we could have a massive heat wave and the grid goes down or something. A solar storm could take out the grid. All these weird things that happen. And then you could be the one sitting there with all the supplies ready to go. So have a plan. If you have a plan, then there's not much to worry about, to be honest with you.
My father had a generator on Long Island after Hurricane Sandy, and he ran extension cords to all the neighbors' homes because he was the one guy who had the working generator. Now is certainly
you become the best neighbor ever when you got a generator. Right?
Do you have solar panels yet, Brad?
And air conditioning? What?
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate that. We're coming up on the half an hour mark of this episode of the Carolina Weather Group, and I want to end on what will hopefully be an upbeat, positive, fun note, and something to maybe do with the kids this weekend. Brad, we've got a meteor shower shower. And you're normally the one who keeps us in line and says, yo, guys, let's not
Yeah.
get excited. The meteor shower is not going to be like the headlines say it is. But
Yeah.
when we have a chance,
Yeah. So I am normally like, I'm the voice of reason. I love astronomy. I don't want people to be disappointed. 90% of all meteor showers are hyped way too much. But the Perseid meteor shower coming up this weekend. And then again, we've got the Geminid meteor shower in December. Those are always two of my favorite. But this year, they're occurring at a time when the moon phase is going to be 10% or less. So coming up this weekend, the peak of the Perseid meteor shower, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And really, you could pick any of those nights. If you get out between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. before the moon does come up, there should be some good visibility. But you're still going to want to get to the darkest locations, away from the outside walls and windows, walls and windows, away from any kind of lights. You're just going to want to get out in the middle of nowhere. Let your eyes adjust. And the worst thing you could do, guys, is stare at your phone, because it's going to make your eyes adjust wrong. So you're going to want to get out there and let your eyes just look at the sky and lay back and enjoy it. I mean, you're going to see some shooting stars this weekend if you get to a good spot.
you have any suggestions on good spots? Selfishly asking.
I'm not giving them all the way. No. No, I think some great spots. The coast is great because like the Outer Banks of North Carolina are great because once you look out over the ocean, there's no lights, right? The coast is great. The mountains are great. But, Frank and I were talking before the show. There are some hidden gems, some spots in the Midlands of South Carolina that aren't bad. You just want to get away from the major cities. And to me, just getting away from streetlights in general, like I find even the difference between my front yard and my backyard because of the lighting is it's almost like having like a shield. If you have tall trees or houses that block the light from the side and you look straight up, that tends to be the best. And that's one thing I would tell you is everyone asks where to look. This meteor shower is so active, just look straight up because honestly, straight up is also the thinnest part of the atmosphere to look through. So it's going to be the clearest and it's the furthest away from the light sources, which are on the ground. So to me, get a chair, a blanket, make sure you're not laying on a fire ant hill and look straight up. And then you'll have
personal experience. Where does that reference come from?
Let's just say I speak from experience that you're going to want to find a spot where there's no fire ants.
If you live in the Carolinas, you probably have some expertise with fire ants.
Yeah, and at night, you always don't know where you're stepping or laying, and so you just got to be careful, and you'll feel that sting and know you're in the wrong spot. But maybe use the flashlight for that. But yeah, I like looking straight up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, looking forward to that. And as we go this week, I have some very exciting news. I finally saw a rocket launch in person myself. If you were with us on the Carolina Weather Group earlier this year, I got to go to Kennedy Space Center and the NASA social for the Crew 6 launch, and then it got scrubbed at T-minus 2 minutes. Well, this was a Falcon 9, similar to the one they used for crew missions, launching last week from Kennedy Space Center, as seen from the beach near Melbourne. And it was everything that Tony Rice told me it would be. Yeah. It was a giant sun in the middle of the night that lit up the entire sky. We even got to see the booster rocket come back down very briefly offshore. And the coolest thing, most fascinating thing, was that the sound took 3 or 4 minutes to get to us.
Yeah.
And you could still feel it when it finally got to us. It was spectacular. And you can just, it's also interesting. It looks like just like a star here, but in real life, it just looked like a giant candle.
Yeah.
And then it's separated right over the horizon. We could see it straight out. You could see the booster rockets separating. The color of the smoke went from orange to like a grayish. And then the satellite that it was launching was up in orbit like an hour later.
Yeah.
Crazy time.
It's awesome, man.
So cool.
I'm glad you got to see that. I've got to see 3 in person, and they never get old. It's like one of those things you're like, you just want to see another one. They're so amazing.
So cool.
The video just can never do them justice because you can't look straight at it. Because it is blinding.
Oh yeah.
That was the thing when I saw the shuttle go up, like that was the one thing I was not expecting. And yeah, that's so good. And not a bad vantage point and some pretty awesome photography there, honestly.
Yeah.
It was amazing. This is my Pixel 7 Pro. It's what we shot our NASA documentary on. And we had a full moon. I was taking night sight photos of my family members out on the beach with like 6 or 7 second exposures with nothing but the moonlight. And it looks like the middle of the day when they were finally finished rendering on the phone. It was crazy. But this right here, Brad, this also reminds me of the NBC, The More You Know.
Yeah.
Across the screen.
It is so cool. I got to see Ghost 16 go up from literally like 2 miles away, and you're right. The sound is like blows. It's so loud when you're that close.
So loud.
And seeing it over the water like you did is so cool to see we saw night launch too. It was reflecting off the water. It was just awesome.
We had a great vantage point. Some clouds, as you saw, there was a weather delay associated with the launch. And I got to give kudos to the local ham radio guy. He was giving us all the updates, and that's what I was listening to in the local ham net. So it was really cool. Really cool stuff.
It's amazing
Brad,
how many launches are down there. The chances are if you go down there now for a week or half a week, you're going to see a launch. I mean,
I think SpaceX broke a record between this launch and the one that followed, which was a Starlink.
Yeah,
they broke a
Starlink
record for
was
like
after
how
that.
fast they turned the pad around.
It was like 2 hours, wasn't it?
That was a couple days, I think, but like
No,
it was
there
still like
I swear one night. Well, it was 2 different pads though. It wasn't the same.
right.
But
I
that
think
night,
this
I think
launch
they did-
and then
Yeah, I was surprised they had them stacked up like that. But they are like pumping those things out quickly.
If you
It's
think about
exciting.
it,
Go ahead, Jared.
if you think about it, we're finally realizing the lofty goals of the shuttle program, because that was the idea with the shuttle program, was you put one out there and you process another one and you just keep shuttles going and going and going. And it's taken us a little longer to get there, but it looks like we figured this thing out. We've got it down to a science.
Yeah, it's amazing. We still take it for granted. I don't think people realize how cool this stuff is.
It's so cool.
It's literally rocket science.
Yeah,
Literally.
But you know what blows my mind, because I'm so into this, so I'm always looking at the launch schedule, and I follow this great site, and I can't remember the name of it now. It's what I use for launch schedule. There's an app, and the guy runs it. But I like that he has every launch on there, but he shows how much each launch costs as well.
Oh,
Most of these are like $50 to $60 million per launch, and that's going up I'm just like, the money involved in this is insane.
and then there's insurance policies on the payloads. That's a whole.
Yeah, when one blows up or something bad happens, you're like, oh my gosh, that's $60 million down the tube. Yeah, I use a site called Space Launch Schedule, and a guy, he has a Patreon site for it, but he has an app, and it's a really great site. But I love when you click on I'm clicking on the Starlink one now, and $52 million per launch. It's like, it blows my mind. And they're doing
Well,
that
I
like
gotta
every
give-
other day.
I got to give Tony Rice, our NASA ambassador in Raleigh, credit for alerting me to this launch. It was on his launch schedule, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, we're going to be there! This is going to be great!" And it totally was. Brad, where
you
can
better
our
pay
viewers here at the
attention to
Carolina? What was that?
You got to pay attention to the launch schedule, because it literally changes hour by hour.
I didn't tell my family until that evening.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get them too excited or jinx it. Brad, where can we find you on television and for more wonderful Brad Panovich-ness?
Obviously, WCNC online, on air. We're everywhere, but WX Brad on all the social platforms. Just stay extra cautious overnight. Frank made a good point about making sure your phone is charged up. Maybe have the audio on or that weather radio, just in case. We have some rough weather coming in the early morning hours, and we don't want to see some surprise spin up or something catch you off guard. But we will have some rough weather in the morning.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Frank's got one more thing, and I know I keep saying one more thing. Frank's got one more thing before we go. And Frank, we have a hard out on CNC Plus in like less than 5 minutes. So what do you got on the screen here for us?
Okay, well, I can make it quick here. First, I want to talk about SCEMD's hazard evacuation survey that they're doing right now. And that graphic you see there is a QR code that can give you a link that gives you a quick link to the survey. And we're looking for people who live in coastal South Carolina or own property there who are at least 18 years old to take this survey for us to help us better understand how people behave when they're being evacuated or under an evacuation order. Survey responses are anonymous, and no, we're not trying to spy on you or anything. We're just trying to better understand how South Carolinians act when they're under a hurricane or under a hurricane warning and an evacuation order. So if you could take out or take that survey for us, takes about 10 minutes. And we would appreciate that a whole lot. And the other thing, if you live in the low country of South Carolina and are looking for something to do this weekend, Charleston County has a hazards expo at Trident College in North Charleston. I will be there Saturday. It goes on both days from 10 to 4. I'm only going to be there Saturday, though. So if you would like to come see me in person and have your kids play a trivia game and look at some other informative materials that I'll have at my booth. James is well familiar with that.
It's a good booth.
At the Shell Museum. Yeah.
It's a good booth. We
Right.
saw it at the Shell Museum.
Melissa did a great job. Melissa Griffin, who's been a guest here before, did a great job of putting that stuff together. So all I have to do is haul it to Charleston and set it up and then break it down and haul it back. So thanks, Melissa. So if you want to see me in person, come on out.
Jared, he's talking to you.
Yeah, if I got time. Yeah. Sounds great.
Sounds great, Frank. Thank you for those mentions. Jared, good to see you. And Brad Panovich, Chief Meteorologist, WCNC Charlotte. Thanks as always for your time and insight. And I will see you tomorrow at work. That does it for this episode of the Carolina Weather Group. Thanks to WCNC Plus for carrying this week's show. You can find the Carolina Weather Group each week talking about weather, science, technology, and more. From Charlotte, I'm James Brierton. Have a good week. We'll talk to you again real soon.